I remember the exact sound her voice made, sharp, brittle, like porcelain cracking under pressure. "You still have a key to my house?" she snapped, standing in the very kitchen I'd scrubbed, blessed, and made warm with years of memories. Her tone wasn't one of confusion, but of condemnation. As if I were the ghost of a woman she'd worked so hard to forget. As if I had no right to stand where I stood. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The air had been pulled from my lungs, replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. She, the sister-in-law I once shared holiday recipes with, who used to text me at midnight about baby names and bridal drama, now stood in front of me like a stranger backed by righteousness. It wasn't just her question. It was the underlying venom, the implication that I was trespassing in a place that had always, and still, belonged to me. When she picked up her phone and dialed 911, I watched her fingers move in a blur of self-righteous fury. She didn't look at me as she gave the address to the dispatcher. She didn't stutter when she claimed, "There's an intruder in my home." My hands trembled not from fear, but from the ache of betrayal. Because this wasn't just a house. This was my house. This was the home Michael and I had built together, my late husband, her brother. Brick by brick. Memory by memory. We bought it with our savings after years of sacrifices. I still remember signing the deed on a rainy Tuesday, his palms sweaty in mine as we held the pen together. Now, 5 months after his heart gave out in our bedroom, I stood in the same home, only to be accused of breaking into it. She had moved in 2 months after the funeral. Temporarily, she said. To keep me company. But slowly, insidiously, her presence swelled into control, rearranging furniture, changing the locks for security reasons, and telling guests that I was staying for a while like some drifting guest in my own life. I never imagined she'd go this far. When the officers arrived, 2 men with weary eyes and clipped voices, she met them at the door like a hostess. "That woman broke in," she said, pointing at me. "She used to live here, but she doesn't anymore." One of them turned to me. "Ma'am, can we see some ID?" I handed it over, heart pounding. "And you say this is your residence?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. It was bought under my name and Michael's. I've lived here for 7 years." The younger officer looked at the older one, then muttered something under his breath. They stepped outside for a moment. I could hear the static from their radios, the murmur of verification. She hovered behind them, arms folded, confident this would be the final chapter in her erasure of me. When they returned, one of them held a printout, the deed to the house. He read it aloud. "Property registered under Michael James Bennett and Sarah Elaine Bennett. No change of ownership recorded." "Ma'am," he looked at me, "you are Sarah Bennett?" I nodded. He turned slowly to her. "And you are?" She opened her mouth, closed it again. For the first time since she barged into my life with her casseroles and her quiet sabotage, she had nothing to say. Silence. The only sound sweeter than justice. There's a silence people don't talk about enough, the kind that isn't peaceful but weighted. A silence that vibrates with the truth just spoken, like dust hanging in the air after a long-neglected drawer is opened. That was the silence in my kitchen. My sister-in-law, Melanie, stood frozen. Her mouth parted just slightly, as if she might still salvage her story, but the deed was out in the open, printed in black and white, and her narrative had dissolved like sugar in hot tea. The officers looked at her, then back at me. "She's listed as the homeowner," the older one said, handing me back my ID with a nod of quiet respect. "And unless you have legal documentation proving otherwise, you're the one who needs to leave." Melanie's eyes widened. "But Michael was my brother." "He told me," he said. But whatever she thought he said, or wanted him to have said, wasn't on paper. And it wasn't truth. "I'm sorry for your loss," the younger officer offered gently. "But this house isn't yours." And just like that, it was over. Or at least, that chapter was. She left in a daze. Not escorted, not handcuffed, not publicly humiliated, though I admit, part of me had wanted the spectacle. But no, the universe had chosen something quieter. Her exit was marked by the soft jingle of keys hitting the floor. The one she had duplicated behind my back. After they were gone, I stood in the center of the kitchen, the same one I'd danced barefoot in, holding a glass of Merlot and Michael's laughter in my ear. I remembered how we'd painted the cabinets navy blue after he spilled curry sauce, and I called it destiny. How we'd argued over whether the backsplash should be ceramic or glass, and ended up compromising with stone. Now those stones felt cold. I picked up her keys, feeling their weight in my hand. There were 3. One for the front door, one for the garage, and the third, my office. The locked one. My stomach dropped. I ran. Down the hall, through the living room, to the door I hadn't opened since the funeral. I fumbled with the lock, her key slipped in too easily, and when I opened the door, I saw it. Papers. Dozens of them. Spread across my desk like a forensic scene. My bank statements. The joint account Michael and I had opened, now missing funds. Letters. Insurance documents. Even Michael's will, photocopied and marked with sticky notes. She'd been in here. She'd been planning something. I sank to my knees. Not crying. Not yet. Just staring at the mess she'd made of my sanctuary. My safe place. The room where Michael used to sit late into the night editing manuscripts for his publishing job while I cataloged my charity event receipts, my community outreach proposals. All the things our family said were nice hobbies, but never real work. I heard a drawer creak and realized I'd opened it without thinking. Inside was the letter. Michael's handwriting. Still sealed. A letter he'd written 2 weeks before the heart attack. One I couldn't bring myself to open. One that I now held like a lifeline. I pressed it to my chest and whispered to the empty room, "What did you know, Michael? What didn't I see?" Because that was the truth of it. I hadn't wanted to see. Melanie had arrived at my weakest, most shattered hour. She'd brought casseroles and cleaned out closets and spoken in soft tones about helping me move on. I thought she meant grief. She meant eviction. And maybe, just maybe, Michael knew. Maybe that letter was more than a goodbye. I broke the seal. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter, each crease crackling like thunder in the stillness of the room. The handwriting was unmistakably his slanted, neat, slightly hurried like always, as if his thoughts were rushing ahead of his pen. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you in person, and I hate that. You always deserved more than half-finished thoughts and crumpled love notes. But there's something you need to know. Something I've been wrestling with. About Melanie." I stopped breathing. "She's not who you think she is." The words blurred for a second, not from tears, but from the way my heart thundered in my ears. "I know you want to believe the best in people, especially those who come wrapped in the illusion of family. That's one of the things I've always admired about you. But sometimes, that kindness becomes a mirror where the cruel see only their own reflection and try to step through it." I blinked hard. He'd known. I overheard her on the phone last week, talking to someone named Clark. She didn't know I was home yet. She mentioned the deed. Your name. My death. A conversation that only makes sense if someone's planning for your absence. "Sarah, I don't have proof yet. But I'm working on it. I'll talk to her. I'll confront her once I'm sure. But if something happens to me..." The sentence ended midline, the rest swallowed by a line of ink smeared across the paper. A smudge I realized now had been made by water. Tears, maybe. His? Or mine in this moment? I sat back on the floor, the paper resting in my lap like a confession from the grave. He had known. He had suspected her. And instead of telling me outright, he tried to protect me the only way he could with a paper trail. A whispered warning. A letter he must have written quickly and hid away, praying he'd never have to use it. I should have seen it too. The signs. Her interest in our accounts. Her constant hovering near the mail. Her suggestion that I should take a break from managing the house finances in the wake of grief. I'd chalked it up to concern. Family support. I should have known better. Grief doesn't just blind, it sedates. It makes you grateful for hands that hold you, even if they carry knives behind your back. The next morning, I called a locksmith. Then I called a lawyer. Not to press charges yet. I wasn't ready to be vengeful. But I was ready to protect what was mine. My home. My name. My peace. The lawyer, a woman named Nadine, listened patiently as I laid it all out, the intrusion, the forged intimacy, the documents I found. The letter. When I read it aloud to her, she was silent for a long moment before she said, "He didn't just love you. He trusted you to survive. That matters." And it did. More than I realized. That night, I changed every lock, every password. I cleaned the office, filing away the evidence, documenting what I could. Melanie hadn't returned, not yet. But I knew she would. Because people like her always circle back when they smell control slipping from their fingers. The question was no longer if she'd try again. It was whether I'd be ready. And I would be. Because Michael didn't just leave me a house. He left me a warning. And a will to fight. I woke up to silence, the good kind, the kind you only notice after you've lived for months under someone else's breath. Melanie's perfume no longer hung in the hallway. Her voice didn't echo down the stairs, commenting on how dusty things looked or how it would be easier if you just moved somewhere smaller. My home was quiet again. I stepped out into the garden that morning, coffee in hand, letting the air remind me I was still here. Michael's roses were in bloom. He used to joke that they were fussy little divas that only liked his hands. The soil had been cold when we first moved in, stubborn and full of stones. But he'd coax life out of it with patience and compost, and those whispered conversations he thought I didn't hear. Now, they bloomed defiantly, as if they too were reclaiming their space. But there, near the hydrangeas, I noticed something odd. A corner of the garden bed had been disturbed. Freshly turned soil. A sliver of plastic sticking out from under the mulch. I knelt down and brushed it away carefully. A flash drive. My stomach dropped. Back inside, I plugged it into the old laptop I kept in the study, the one Michael used sometimes when his work laptop was too corporate. The folders were oddly named, coded. Spring cleaning, inventory, pics_random. But inside spring cleaning, I found what he must have meant to show me all along. Audio files. Transcripts. Screenshots of texts between Melanie and a man named Clark, exactly the name he'd mentioned in his letter. Melanie, once he's gone, she'll fold. She always folds. Clark, you sure she won't contest the estate? Melanie, please. She'll be too wrapped up in grief to notice I've got the lawyer on speed dial. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of the words pressing against my chest like a boulder. She hadn't just manipulated the grief, I was the grief. The obstacle. The one she hoped would be too broken to notice as she carved out the life she thought she deserved. And Clark? His number matched the one I'd seen on a call log Michael printed and left in the drawer beside the letter. A real estate agent. One who specialized in quick estate transfers for high-value properties in probate limbo. I knew now, she had been preparing to sell the house. My house. The one Michael and I built from love, not just concrete. My next call was to Nadine. She met me that afternoon, her expression carefully neutral as I showed her the contents of the drive. "This changes things," she said softly, glancing over the screenshots. "We're not just talking about manipulation anymore. This is premeditated fraud." "But I want to do it my way," I said. Nadine's eyebrow rose. "Your way? I don't want her arrested yet. I want her to know I know. I want her to feel the edges of the trap closing, to understand that she didn't just fail, she underestimated the wrong woman." Nadine smiled then. "That, I can work with." So we set the plan in motion. An official letter, carefully worded, would be sent to Melanie. From Nadine's firm. It would cite irregularities in recent financial activity surrounding the estate of Michael Bennett and request that she attend a formal meeting at the property to resolve outstanding claims. No threats. No drama. Just an invitation. To the very home she tried to erase me from. She wouldn't be able to resist. The moment she stepped back through that door, I would be waiting with the deed in one hand and her words in the other. And this time, I wouldn't be the one who went silent. The envelope I mailed to her was cream-colored, with embossed lettering, subtle, elegant, and disarming. It looked more like a wedding invitation than a legal summons. That was intentional. Melanie always responded best to appearances. Inside, the letter was direct but polite, on Nadine's firm letterhead. "Dear Ms. Melanie Harper, we are conducting a formal review of matters concerning the estate of the late Michael Bennett and recent financial activities affecting property located at 418 Willow Lane. We invite you to attend a meeting at the aforementioned address on Thursday at 2 p.m. to clarify your position regarding any pending claims. Legal counsel is welcome. Sincerely, Nadine G. Wells, ESQ. Nothing more. No threats. No evidence enclosed. Just enough to pull the thread that would unravel everything. On Thursday at 1:59 p.m., I stood by the living room window, watching the street. The house was pristine, exactly how she remembered it. I'd even placed fresh tulips in the vase on the entry table. Michael's favorite. At 2:04, she arrived. On time enough to feel composed, late enough to feel in control. She stepped out of a sleek black car in her designer heels, a Louis Vuitton bag slung over her shoulder like a trophy. Her sunglasses remained on as she walked up the path, head high, posture perfect. She didn't expect to see me waiting in the doorway. "Sarah," she blinked. "I thought this was a legal meeting." "It is," I said smoothly. "Come in." She stepped inside hesitantly, her gaze sweeping the room like she expected something, or someone, more official. Nadine had deliberately stayed behind for now, giving me the stage. "I assume your lawyer will be joining us?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "She's on her way," I lied. "I thought we could talk first. Privately." She nodded, but the calculation was already beginning in her eyes. We sat in the kitchen, of course we did. The scene of her last attempt at rewriting history. This time, I took the seat at the head of the table. "I received a letter from a firm I don't recognize," she said, folding her arms. "You could have just called me, you know." I tilted my head. "Could I?" Melanie shifted. "Look, Sarah. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye. But Michael's gone. That changes things. I only ever wanted to help. I found the flash drive." She froze. Blinked once. "I know about Clark. I know about your texts. I know about the plan to have me committed, or removed, or whatever narrative you were weaving. I know what you tried to do." A beat passed. 2. Then she exhaled a brittle laugh. "You've misunderstood." "No, Melanie. You did." I reached into the drawer beside me and placed the printed screenshots, Michael's partial letter, and the notarized deed all on the table like cards in a game of poker. Only she wasn't holding any. She stared at the papers, the muscles in her jaw twitching. This proves nothing. It proves intent. And that's enough." She stood abruptly. "I don't have to sit here and be accused. I'm grieving too, Sarah. You think you're the only one who lost him." Her voice cracked, but I couldn't tell if it was performance or panic. "No," I said softly. "I think I'm the only one who didn't try to profit from losing him." She stormed toward the door, but stopped cold when Nadine stepped inside, clipboard in hand, calm as ever. "Miss Harper," Nadine said. "You're just in time. Let's begin." And for the first time in weeks, I saw it, the unraveling. The panic behind the eyes. The realization that the narrative she tried so hard to script was collapsing. That the woman she thought would fade into grief had instead become razor-sharp with purpose. That this house, this life, this peace was never hers to steal. Melanie didn't sit. She hovered near the doorway, arms crossed, as if any contact with the furniture might tether her to accountability. Nadine, unshaken, laid her folder open on the parlor table, the one Michael and I had bought at that antique market by the coast. The one she had once covered with her laptop, using my home office as her own. I sat across from her. This time, I didn't shrink. "We'll keep this straightforward," Nadine said, smoothing out the first page. "The documents found in your possession, including financial statements, personal correspondence, and insurance records, suggest that you accessed information without the legal authority to do so." "I was family," Melanie said, too fast. "Michael confided in me. I was helping manage things." Nadine nodded, non-committal. "That may explain the access, but not the intent. Or the discussion you had with Mr. Clark regarding Sarah's capacity to retain ownership of this property." "I never," Melanie started, but her voice cracked. "Those were just venting texts. People say things they don't mean." "Then why was Mr. Clark preparing documentation for sale?" Silence. Nadine slid another document across the table. "More importantly, why did you list yourself as co-executor in a version of the will that was never legally filed? Where did you get the forged signature?" My breath hitched slightly. This was news even to me. Melanie stared down at the paper, blinking like she could unsee it. I didn't file it. It was just a draft. He was thinking of updating it. He wasn't, I said flatly. Michael had no intention of removing me from anything. He wrote a letter warning me about you. He had a flash drive buried in the garden. He knew. I saw her composure begin to fracture. Her nostrils flared, a sheen of sweat gathering at her hairline. You don't understand how hard it was for me after he died, she said, voice trembling now. You had the whole world's sympathy. But I lost my brother. And you got everything. No, I replied, a bitter smile forming. I kept everything. Because it was always mine. It was a quiet bombshell. Not screamed. Not shouted. Just spoken with the calm of someone who has finally picked up all the pieces of the weapon that wounded her and now holds them like armor. Nadine stood. If you wish to avoid formal charges, Miss Harper, we're willing to negotiate terms. Restitution. A signed affidavit acknowledging your actions. A formal restraining order. Melanie looked like she might faint. This isn't justice. This is revenge. I stood too. No, Melanie. This is reclamation. She didn't speak again. Just turned and walked out of the house, her heels echoing down the steps like the end of a symphony she'd tried to conduct, but never composed. When the door closed, I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just stood still and let the silence breathe around me. It was done. Michael's home, our home, was mine again. Not just legally, but spiritually. Every inch reclaimed. The house felt different after she left. Lighter somehow. As if her presence had added a weight to the air I hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. Rooms that had once felt foreign while she lived here now felt like home again. Not because of the things, but because the shadows had lifted. I walked room to room that evening, touching the edges of photographs she'd tried to box up, running my fingers along the window frames she said needed updating. The ghosts of her judgments lingered in the corners, but they no longer haunted me. In the living room, I found Michael's favorite throw blanket, still folded on the back of the couch, soft, faded, worn in all the right places. He used to wrap it around me when I fell asleep reading. I pulled it close now, letting the weight of it settle on my shoulders. That's when I heard it. Not a voice. Not a noise. A memory. His laughter. It echoed gently in my mind, not loud, not clear, but present enough to stop me mid-step. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. That crooked grin. The way he'd toss his head back when something truly amused him. I hadn't heard it in months, not really. Grief is strange like that. It doesn't always come in sobs and rain. Sometimes it comes in the quiet moments after the storm, when you realize what peace really sounds like. I hadn't just lost him. I'd nearly lost myself. And yet here I was, still standing. Not because I'd forgotten him, but because I finally remembered who I was too. The next morning, I took action. I donated the clothes Melanie left behind. I threw out the things she had bought for the house to help it sell faster. I even repainted the office a shade of dusty lavender that Michael always said made the room feel like a sunrise. I unpacked boxes of things I had tucked away in the weeks after his funeral, thinking I couldn't bear to see them. His favorite books. Our wedding photo. The journal he'd kept of our home renovations. There, in the back of the closet, I found something I didn't expect. A small black box. Inside was the necklace he gave me for our 5th anniversary, a simple pendant engraved with our initials. I hadn't worn it in months. Somehow, wearing it felt like a final tether to the life we'd shared. But today, I needed to remember. Not just the pain of losing him, but the beauty of having loved him at all. So I put it on. Not to mourn, but to honor. Later that day, I sat on the porch with my tea and watched the neighborhood kids ride past on their bikes. Mrs. Delaney across the street waved from her garden. For the first time in a long time, I waved back without forcing a smile. And when the mail arrived, there was an envelope. Cream-colored. Embossed. My hands shook for just a moment before I opened it. But it wasn't from Melanie. It was from the city. A permit. For the community project Michael and I had submitted plans for just before he died, A pocket park for the block, a place where neighbors could gather, kids could play, and families could sit together under trees. Approved. I laughed then. Not bitterly. Not painfully. But joyfully. Because life, it seemed, was ready to bloom again. The plans for the pocket park had started as one of Michael's Sunday dreams. He'd sit beside me with a sketch pad on the porch, legs stretched out, humming something tuneless. "Right there," he'd say, pointing across the street. "Where the old sycamore used to be. That's where the bench should go. Stone, not wood. Wood wears too fast in the rain." He'd talked about it so often I'd nearly forgotten we'd submitted the proposal. It was our way of giving back to the neighborhood that cradled our life together. A modest triangle of unused land just past the corner, city-owned, unloved, unnoticed. Now it was ours to shape. I walked to the lot that afternoon, permit in hand, boots crunching against the unkempt gravel. It didn't look like much, just patchy grass and a rusting chain-link fence on two sides. But I could already see it. A curved walkway. Raised beds with herbs and lavender. That stone bench under a sapling that would one day stretch toward the sky. Michael had even picked the tree. A sugar maple, he'd said. So it'll catch fire in the fall. Like it remembers how to burn. I stood there for a long time, the afternoon sun warming my back, imagining the families that would someday gather here. I could almost hear his voice again, offering a suggestion from beside me, teasing that I always made spaces feel like home, even the ones outside. And maybe that was the heart of it. Home wasn't just a house or a deed. It was the courage to take back what had been nearly stolen. To dream again in the rubble. To remember love, not just loss. I spent the next few days assembling a small team, just neighbors at first. Mrs. Delaney brought over fresh lemonade and a worn-out gardening hat she insisted I wear. Roger from 2 doors down offered his truck for hauling materials. The teenage twins across the street showed up unasked, shovels in hand, already squabbling over who'd get to dig the deepest hole. And me? I showed them Michael's sketches. His rough outlines. His favorite spots to sit and think. They listened like pilgrims. And I felt, for the first time, that maybe grief could build something, not just tear things down. One evening, as we marked out the bench's location with stakes and string, I found myself talking to him. "You were right," I whispered. "Stone over wood. It'll last longer." The wind shifted just then, rustling the paper in my hand. Not a sign, maybe. But not just weather, either. That night, I sat in the now-cleared garden behind our home, the stars blinking open above me like old friends. I lit a single candle, placed it in the center of the table, and opened the journal he'd left behind. The last entry was unfinished. April 12th, the park is a long shot, but it's worth it. Sarah thinks I'm just being idealistic again, but she doesn't realize she's the reason I believe in these things. She sees the bones of a space and knows how to turn it into heart. I closed the journal slowly. He saw me, even in the spaces I had forgotten to see myself. The next Saturday, I hosted dinner. Not for family, at least not by blood, but for the people who had become mine in the quiet spaces grief carved out. The table stretched the length of the backyard, mismatched chairs borrowed from neighbors and folding tables draped in linen tablecloths I'd unearthed from the hall closet. The air smelled of rosemary and lemon and something older, something like belonging. Mrs. Delaney brought her famous apple tart. The twins made garlic bread and burned half of it. Roger brought beer and a bouquet of wildflowers that clashed beautifully with the good china. We didn't light candles out of necessity, but out of respect, for the effort, for each other, for the unseen. I saved the seat at the end of the table for Michael. No one asked about the empty chair. But everyone knew. There was laughter that night. The kind that builds slowly, layer by layer, until it spills over like music. And for a moment, I wasn't just a widow reclaiming a house or building a park. I was whole. After everyone left, I washed the dishes in silence, the house echoing with their voices like a cathedral filled with reverence. I glanced once more at the empty chair before tucking it back under the table. Grief has many chapters. Some are rage and others are ruin. But sometimes, if you're lucky, grief becomes a gathering. A reconstruction. That night, I wrote a letter. To myself. I'd never done that before. But it felt necessary, like closing a loop that had frayed the day Michael died. Dear Sarah, you made it. You survived the storm and stayed kind. You protected the home he built and planted something new in the wreckage. They tried to unmake you, but you remembered how to rebuild. Not just walls, but self, identity, peace. This isn't the end, but it's a new beginning. And you are finally ready. With love, Sarah. I folded the letter and tucked it in the same drawer where it sat. 2 voices, 2 journeys, but the same house, the same legacy. The next morning, I drove to the edge of town where the nursery opened early. I asked for a sugar maple. Planting something special? The clerk asked. Yes, I said, pressing a palm to the bark of the young tree. Something that remembers how to burn. The soil was stubborn, thick with old gravel and roots from forgotten trees. But I didn't mind. The work felt sacred. I knelt where Michael once pointed and dug with slow, intentional strokes. Not because I lacked the strength, but because I needed the time. Each scoop of earth was a memory unburied. Our first anniversary. The argument over patio tiles. That stormy afternoon when we planted lavender along the fence line and kissed between thunderclaps. The hole was just deep enough when I set the tree in place. Its leaves trembled as if uncertain. Young, fragile, but reaching. I backfilled the dirt, hands trembling not from exhaustion, but reverence. Then I placed a stone at its base. Smooth, oval, gray, etched with his initials. Not a gravestone. A milestone. Afterward, I sat beside the maple with my knees caked in dirt and a mug of tea cooling in my hands. The sky above turned a soft blush, and I realized how long it had been since I'd watched the sunrise without urgency, without a to-do list, without Melanie's voice in the back of my mind, turning everything into a chore or contest. This morning, there was no contest. Just a tree. And peace. Later that day, Nadine called. Melanie had signed the documents. She wouldn't be contesting anything. In exchange for silence, she'd disappear. No lawsuits. No interviews. Just absence. It was a relief, but not a triumph. Because the real victory wasn't legal. It was internal. I'd stood up, spoken out, protected what mattered, and reclaimed what they tried to take. Not just the house, but myself. I walked the rooms again that evening, this time differently. Not to mourn. Not even to reclaim. But to bless. Every corner with light. Every photo frame with memory. Every creaking stair with gratitude. In the office, I placed the final object, a framed copy of Michael's sketch for the park. Beside it, the letter he wrote me. And below that, mine to myself. A trilogy. Love. Loss. Liberation. It happened as I was sorting through Michael's desk, something I hadn't dared touch until now. The bottom drawer, the one with the old tax folders and tangled charger cords, held something unexpected. A small velvet box. I stared at it for a long time before touching it, my breath hitching like it always did when the past reached out with unexpected tenderness. Inside, cushioned in black satin, was a ring. Not mine. Not his. But new. Simple. Elegant. Rose gold with a single diamond nestled in the center like a quiet promise. Tucked beneath it, a folded receipt from a local jeweler, dated just 2 months before his death. On the back, scrawled in his familiar hand, just 4 words. Second yes. New life. I gasped. Then laughed, a short, breathless sound that caught in my throat and turned into something softer. He had been planning to propose again. Not a renewal. Not a ceremony. A choice. He wanted to ask me again. After all the years, after the bills and the routine and the soft Sunday mornings that had grown too quiet. He'd still chosen me. All over again. And now here I was, alone with a question never spoken aloud. I closed the box gently and held it to my chest. He had known how much I needed to hear it again. Not because I doubted his love, but because the world had taken so much and made me question what was left. But there it was. Still waiting for me. That evening, I wore the ring. Just for a while. Not as a symbol of marriage, but as a symbol of survival. A reminder that love didn't vanish with the man who held it. That I was still worthy of being chosen even by myself. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at my reflection. Not just the widow. Not the victim. A woman. Still whole. Still rising. The house had a rhythm again. I noticed it in small things, how the floor creaked in the same places when I danced barefoot to old Motown records, how the faucet squealed slightly when turned too fast, how the wind hummed against the chimney on cold nights. These were once background noises. Now, they were a song I'd forgotten the lyrics to, returning line by line. I'd started leaving the door to the office open, too. For months, it had been a place of ghosts, Michael's half-finished projects, the smell of his cologne in the fabric of the chair, the shadow of betrayal Melanie left behind. But now it was filled with sunlight again. The maple tree just outside cast dappled light across the desk in the mornings, and sometimes I swore I could feel his presence stronger there than anywhere else. So I moved my own work in. The community foundation I'd once helped part-time, handling their event planning and outreach, welcomed me back like a lost sister. I offered to do it freelance from home. They offered double the pay I'd ever asked for. We never stopped hoping you'd return, their director, Amanda, said on the phone. You made people feel seen. That stuck with me. You made people feel seen. Perhaps that was my real inheritance, not the house or the ring or the papers Melanie had tried to steal, but the legacy of seeing people. The way Michael had seen me. The way I had seen him. The way I was learning, finally, to see myself. One evening, I passed the hall mirror and caught my reflection mid-laugh, mouth open, eyes bright, head tossed back. It startled me. Not because I looked different, but because I looked alive. It had been so long since I'd recognized joy on my own face. Later that night, I sat on the front steps, wrapped in Michael's throw blanket, watching the neighbors stroll past. A little girl on a scooter waved, and I waved back. Her father nodded at me, smiling. You're the lady building the park, right? I nodded. My daughter says she wants to read books under your tree. I laughed. Tell her it's hers now, too. He paused. We're lucky to have you here. As they walked away, the words lingered in the air. We're lucky to have you here. Not a sentiment I'd heard often since Michael died. Not something Melanie had ever said. But it meant more coming from a stranger. A neighbor. A witness to the rebuilding. Because it wasn't about being needed. It was about being seen. His birthday came on a Thursday. I knew it was coming, circled on every calendar I owned, etched into the back of my mind like a bruise I kept pressing to see if it still hurt. It did. Michael would have been 39. He used to hate birthdays. Just another year closer to orthopedic shoes, he'd joke, trying to downplay the attention. But every year, I'd find a way to celebrate him anyway, usually with carrot cake, his favorite, and some small silly gift. One year, I gave him socks with little penguins in tuxedos. Another year, a bonsai tree he promptly named Greg. This year, I baked the cake anyway. Not for him. For me. Because grief changes form. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits with you, quiet, loyal, like an old friend who's learned not to talk too much. I didn't cry that morning, though my eyes stung as I mixed the batter. I brought a slice to the tree. The maple had started to take root, leaves still tender but brighter now. There was something steady about it, something grounded. I placed the plate beneath it like an offering. And then I sat. No words. No prayers. Just breath. Just presence. But as the wind picked up and rustled the leaves above me, I whispered, you would have liked how it turned out. And I meant the cake. But also, everything. Later that afternoon, I opened the memory box, the one I hadn't dared touch since the funeral. It was filled with the smallest pieces of him, a movie stub from our first date, a dog-eared copy of The Little Prince with his underlines, and a photo I didn't remember seeing before. Us. At the beach. I was wearing his hoodie, half asleep against his shoulder, and he was smiling at the camera like he knew exactly how lucky he was. On the back, in his handwriting. She made me believe again. She gave me my second life. I pressed the photo to my chest. Not to mourn. To remember. To reclaim the truth that love like that doesn't end. It just changes shape. And on days like this, it rises again in the form of a carrot cake, a tree, a whisper. And a woman still standing. It was just after sunrise when the knock came. Soft, hesitant, the kind of knock that wants to be ignored. I wasn't expecting anyone, and part of me considered pretending I wasn't home. But something told me to open the door. It was her. Melanie. Hair pulled back too tightly, dark circles under her eyes, holding nothing but a small envelope. We stood in silence for a moment, two women who had once shared Sunday brunches, whispered baby names, clinked wine glasses in kitchens lit with laughter, and then tore each other apart. "I won't stay," she said quickly. I needed to give you this." She handed me the envelope and stepped back like she was ready to be struck. There was no malice in her voice, only exhaustion. Grief of a different kind. "What is it?" I asked. "An apology." "Too late, I know. But..." She trailed off. I didn't ask her in. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. But I did nod. "Thank you," I said. It was all I could offer. Not forgiveness. Not warmth. Just the kind of acknowledgement that doesn't excuse, but understands. She turned and walked away without another word. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, the morning light spilling across the wood like gold, and opened the envelope. A letter. Written in her angular, dramatic handwriting. "Sarah, I thought I hated you. I blamed you for taking Michael from the family, for holding a part of him I never could. But the truth is, I envied you. The way he looked at you. The peace you had. The certainty. I lost myself after he died. And in trying to reclaim anything, I betrayed what mattered most. You don't owe me anything. But I wanted you to know. I see now. I see what I tried to steal. It wasn't just the house. It was the kind of love that survives. I sat there for a long time, letting the words settle. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed. It didn't make things right. It didn't undo the harm. But it did remind me of something I had nearly forgotten. People hurt from places we cannot always see. And healing, while never guaranteed, is sometimes whispered, not shouted. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the others. Not to cherish it, but to honor that even broken people sometimes try to mend. Spring arrived with quiet ceremony, like a hand placed gently on your shoulder, not to startle, but to say I'm still here. The tree outside had grown an inch taller. Its leaves unfurled like promises kept. The community park had begun to take shape as well, mulched pathways, benches, planters filled with thyme and marigolds, and the scent of lavender that clung to your clothes like memory. One Saturday morning, I placed a wooden sign at the park's entrance. Bennett Grove. Named not for him alone, but for the life we shared. For the space we built. For the roots we laid down together, even in the soil of grief. Neighbors stopped to admire it. Children danced past it, scooters buzzing over fresh pavement. An older man paused to tip his cap. But it was the little girl from 2 doors down, Ella, who made me smile the widest. She knelt near the base of the maple, her fingers brushing the bark. "Is this your tree?" she asked. "It was my husband's," I said softly. "Now it's everyone's." She thought about that for a moment. Then she pulled a tiny beaded bracelet from her wrist and tied it gently around one of the lower branches. "For him," she whispered. I felt tears prick, but I didn't stop her. Later, I added a second sign, smaller, nestled near the bench Michael had designed. "This place is for anyone who has loved deeply and lost quietly, and still chose to bloom." It was for the widows who cooked for one. For the sisters who said goodbye too young. For the broken-hearted who painted over the cracks with morning light. And for me. Because grief doesn't have to be loud to be true. Sometimes, it looks like a park bench under a new tree. A garden of names spoken in wind. A girl still healing, but no longer alone. Summer came with heat and memory. The days were long and golden, filled with the kind of light that made everything feel touched by something sacred. But with that beauty came its shadows. Because healing, I had learned, wasn't linear. It moved like a tide forward, retreating, sometimes still. One day in late July, I received a call from Michael's old publishing house. The man on the line, his former editor, Lewis, had a voice like worn denim and news I wasn't prepared for. "Sarah," he said, hesitating slightly, "Michael had submitted a manuscript before he passed. It was unfinished, but we've been reviewing it and we think there's something there. Something honest. Beautiful, even. My breath caught. I didn't know he'd submitted anything. He didn't want to jinx it, Lewis replied gently. He'd been writing it quietly for over a year. Said it wasn't quite a memoir, not quite fiction. A blend. Stories about love and grief and you. Mostly you. I couldn't speak. The silence on the line stretched long enough for him to add, I can send you a copy. You don't have to do anything with it. But it felt wrong not to let you know. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for what felt like hours, trying to remember all the nights Michael had sat in that office, typing with headphones in, brushing me off with a smile when I asked what he was working on. It's not ready, he'd say. But you'll be the first to read it. And now he'd kept his word. When the manuscript arrived, it was bound in a simple blue folder. The title page read only, What We Build. The first page made my breath catch. They always said we were an odd match. Her, the quiet soul with a calendar for a heart. Me, the dreamer with shoes too worn for corporate carpets. But Sarah, she's the architect of things unseen. She doesn't build with brick or wood, but with grace. And she made a home out of me before I ever realized I was worth sheltering. I didn't read the whole thing in one sitting. I couldn't. Each page felt like opening a time capsule made of heartbeat and breath. There were stories I recognized, rewritten with tenderness. Arguments softened by hindsight. Jokes we shared in the dark. Dreams he never told me, now offered like gifts he left on the doorstep of my future. Near the middle, he wrote something that hollowed me and healed me all at once. I always thought I'd give her the world. But she never wanted the world. She wanted peace. And now I see, that's bigger. The publishing house offered to finish and publish it, an editor to tie the threads together, with a foreword by me if I was willing. I was quiet for a long time before I answered, because part of me wanted to keep the words just for myself. Selfishly. Tenderly. But I remembered the park. The children. The old man with the cap. The woman who thanked me quietly after seeing the bench inscription. Grief doesn't belong in closets. And love that deep? It wants to be shared. So I agreed. And on the first day of September, I stood under our tree, his tree, and read aloud from the book's foreword at a small gathering organized by the foundation and the publishing house. Friends. Neighbors. Strangers. They sat in folding chairs, eyes closed, listening. Some cried. Others smiled. And when I finished, I looked out at them and realized. This was the life I'd grown. Not what was handed to me. Not what was left behind. But what I had chosen to cultivate from ruin. As the wind passed through the branches, I heard it again. His laugh. Not loud. Not clear. But there. Still there. The book was released in early October, just as the leaves began to burn red and amber across the city, a palette Michael always said made the world feel like it was exhaling. I held the first printed copy in my hands the way you might cradle a newborn, afraid to disturb its stillness. What We Build sold quietly, then steadily. It didn't become a bestseller, and it didn't need to. It found its way into the hands of the right people, the ones who understood what it meant to lose and still choose to create. I received letters. Dozens of them. From widows who had forgotten how to speak their partner's name aloud. From grown children grieving quiet fathers. From caretakers who had buried spouses and selves alike. They all echoed the same sentiment. Thank you for reminding me that it's okay to still want beauty. But with that beauty came something I hadn't prepared for. The need to say a final goodbye. Grief had turned into a steady companion by then. No longer cruel, but no less present. Like the way dusk settles over a town, gentle, inevitable, quietly changing the light. One morning, I woke before the sun, wrapped in the same blanket he'd once tucked around me, and felt it settle in my chest. It was time. Time to let go of the rituals I had clung to in the early days, the plate by the tree, the untouched chair at the table, the way I paused outside our bedroom door before entering, like awaiting permission from someone no longer there. That night, I did something I had both dreaded and longed for. I took off the ring. The anniversary ring he'd bought but never had the chance to give me. I held it in my palm, its surface still warm from the skin it had rested against for months. The engraving inside read simply, "Yes, again." I placed it in a small box, the same one I found it in, and walked to the tree. The park was quiet, the wind soft. A few fallen leaves clung to the bench like forgotten prayers. I sat and whispered everything I hadn't yet said. I miss your laugh. Your ridiculous socks. The way you always knew when to talk and when not to. I miss the life we didn't get to finish. But I'm still here. And I've kept building. Then I buried the ring at the base of the maple, beneath the stone with his initials. Not as a goodbye to him, but to the waiting. To the part of me that had been suspended between memory and movement. As I stood, I felt something shift inside me, not a break, but a softening. The kind that happens when you release what you love not because it's gone, but because it's part of you now, no longer separate, no longer needing to be held so tightly. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams. No restlessness. Just stillness. Peace, not because everything was resolved, but because I had learned to stop fearing the unresolved. The autumn winds came early that year, sweeping through the neighborhood like a reminder that everything, eventually, must change. The leaves from Michael's tree scattered across the street, collecting in corners like forgotten letters. And I, for the first time, didn't feel the impulse to gather them all. Some things were meant to be left where they landed. I began to open the windows more, even on the chilly days. The house breathed differently when the air moved through it, like lungs expanding after holding in grief too long. I realized I had grown used to stillness, the kind that makes you afraid to disturb anything in case it all falls apart again. But now I wanted the breeze. I wanted the laughter from the children playing at the park to drift through the curtains. I wanted to smell the firewood from a neighbor's stove, to hear the world moving forward. One afternoon, I heard music. Not from a speaker or a car passing by, but from a guitar. Real. Tentative. Practiced. It was coming from across the street. A new neighbor had moved in young, quiet, alone. I'd seen her only twice, both times with headphones in, eyes down. She reminded me of myself in those first few weeks after Michael's death. Floating. Hollowed. And now she was playing music. Badly. But earnestly. I found myself listening from the porch, smiling as she stumbled through chords and started over. There was something brave about it. About trying something new in the middle of sorrow. That evening, I made 2 cups of tea. I placed one beside me and the other on the step, just in case. A small invitation. A signal. She didn't come over that night. But the next day, there was a note tucked in my mailbox, scrawled on lined paper. Thank you for the tea. And for not minding the music. I'm trying to learn something that reminds me of my brother. He used to play. I thought if I could remember how it sounded, I'd remember him better. N. I replied the next day. I think your brother would be proud. Music has a way of holding people when words can't. Keep going. S. And just like that, a quiet friendship began. No expectations. No pressure. Just the occasional note, the shared tea left on porch steps, the slow unfurling of 2 people who understood what it meant to be missing someone you still talked to out loud. It reminded me that healing isn't just about looking back. It's about reaching forward. Not to replace what was lost, but to make space for something new.